As you can see, we're in a vineyard, and a successful vineyard at that. This is on a 2.5 acre site, not far from the village of East Farndon in the Welland Valley. The business was founded 25 years ago by David and Jane Bates, who still run it today, making a range of wines, both red and white, still and sparkling, and even have a small orchard providing apples for a popular local cider. We have been privileged to be able to follow and record a year in the life of the vineyard, and David has been our constant guide and source of information throughout the year.
This is an English vineyard, as may be obvious. There are now about 500 odd vineyards in England. They were re-established in this country in the early 1950s after a gap of 300 or 400 years when the climate was really not suitable for vines. I had the idea of planting a vineyard back in the 1970s when I lived in Evington in Leicester and grew some vines on my allotment. And I thought, what a wonderful idea when I retire to plant a vineyard and sit in amongst my vines drinking a bottle of wine. But sadly it's not as easy as that. There's an awful lot of work to do and you hardly ever get any time off to sit down. I planted this vineyard 25 years ago, really as a retirement hobby. One of the first things I had to do was plant trees around the site as a windbreak, because cold winds tend to hold the vines back. These trees behind me are eucalyptus. They come from Tasmania and Queensland, and in Australia they grow on mountains. And generally at 2,000 to 3,000 feet, which is why they're hardy and can withstand the frost. I planted about 1,500 vines. The stage we're at the moment is early spring, when the vines are still dormant. They're just beginning to come to life. All the growth that was made last year has to be cut away so that we leave just 2 canes, as you'll see here, either side, and from these canes that we've laid down on the wires, new growth will emerge. First thing I have to do is to decide which 2 canes I'm going to keep for next year, and that's always a difficult thing because you need to keep the shape of the vine. So I've decided that this one is going to be laid down. We have some special clips that hold the vine in place. There we go. That now will form the basis of next year's crop. Each of these buds will grow up, and on each of those verticals there will be 2, 3 or sometimes 4 bunches of grapes. Generally, from a quality point of view, we try and restrict it to 2 bunches, and this is called the double give them extra support, because once they've got a full crop of grapes, it's quite a heavy weight to carry. There we are. That's clipped down. That's next year's crop. We need just a spur to form arms for next year, and then everything else is pruned away. We chop the canes up, drop them on the ground, and then they go back into the soil so that we don't take any goodness away from the earth.
We returned to the vineyard barely 3 months later in July, to a much changed scene and with plenty of work in progress.
When we winter pruned these vines, we laid down 2 canes, and in 2 months those canes have shot new growth, which has completely built up a canopy. This time of year, midsummer, we go along and top them off. If they get too tall, we take the tops off. And also they tend to throw side shoots, a bit like tomatoes. These contribute nothing to the ripening of the grapes. So again, when we've got time, we take them all off. In the Midlands, vines flower during the 1st and 2nd week of July. Further south, they flower during Wimbledon fortnight. This vine here, which is called Madeleine Orangevine, is starting to flower, and you'll see that really it's not very spectacular. The flowers are very, very tiny. Fortunately, they're self-pollinating, so that we don't have to rely on bees or other insects to do the work. However, what we don't want is a bit of a disaster, is if it rains day after day during the flowering period, because if the petals are continually wet, they won't open, so no pollination takes effect, and you get a very poor crop. This year we've had a good combination of sun and rain. We don't mind a bit of rain providing the sun comes out.
Also enjoying this summer's good growing conditions, at the top of the vineyard, the orchard has a good crop of apples that will later be made into cider.
Here we are then, beginning of September, 1st week of September. The grapes are starting to turn colour, and the very earliest variety which we grow, which is Solaris, which is now becoming very popular. This variety has quite a distinct aroma to it, which particularly attracts wasps, and for that reason we have to net it with a very fine netting. Strangely, this year, in 2016, we've not had a great problem so far with wasps. I can't believe that there aren't any, but birds instead have been the problem that wasps normally are. So we put up this artificial hawk, which gives us a window of about a week before the birds cotton on that he's not real and start to take no notice. We have other predators apart from birds and wasps. Badgers, which is surprising to many people, eat grapes and will take them in large quantities and do a lot of damage to the vines at the same time. We do have an easy answer to them, and that is an electric fence. Once we put that up, they come along in the night, they touch it with the end of their nose, get a shock, and they never come back. So that has been, fortunately, 100% effective. As with all the varieties, we take leaves off to let the sunlight in. These are coming along, but it's going to be, well, another 3 or 4 weeks from now, 1st week of October, before we start to pick them. This variety goes into our red wine, which is called Naseby, after the Battle of Naseby. As you'll see, it's starting to change colour. We wouldn't expect to pick this variety until the 2nd week of October, or possibly even the 3rd.
October duly arrives, and the fruit, the white grapes, the red and the apples have all ripened and are ready for picking. For this, there is an army of friends and relatives ready to lend a much appreciated helping hand.
This year has been a good year. We've had a pretty dry summer and above average temperatures, which has brought the harvest forward. Generally we start picking first week of October and go right through almost to the last week of October. But this year all the grapes have ripened more or less at the same time, so the picking periods become very condensed.
With all the grapes picked on the same day, the next stage in the process, the crushing, makes it a rather long day. The days of treading the grape have long gone, and today it is done by machine. The screw crushes the grapes into a pulp, cleverly separating the stalks from the fruit. The red grapes are processed in exactly the same way later in the day, and with them we can follow the rest of the process. The output from the crushing machine is a pulp which is here being pumped into a tub awaiting transfer to the wine press to extract the juice. The sack inside the press is porous, and with the lid firmly in place, water is pumped into another sack at the bottom of the press. As it fills, the resultant pressure squeezes the pure juice out of the sack and through this mesh. And, before transferring the juice into its final container, a quick assessment by the master. All that remains now is to remove the residue of grape pulp, which is used as a mulch to provide nutrient for next year's crop. And finally, to seal the container and move it into the storeroom. We will return here later in the year when David will explain the all-important fermentation process. But first, we must go back to the crushing machine where the apples, already harvested, are being processed. For this, family members are drafted in for the day.
We come down every autumn to come and help David and Jane with the apple picking, so it's a bit of a family affair. So we've got Julian, son, and 2 grandsons, and I'm Gail, daughter-in-law. So it's normally a good annual event. We all enjoy it, kids enjoy it, and we enjoy drinking the cider afterwards.
The principles of making cider and wine are basically the same. It's all about obtaining the juice, fermenting it and bottling, but there is a slight difference in the equipment. With apples we have to puree them in a machine that will cut them up, whereas with the grapes we crush them. Once the apples have been reduced to a pulp, they then go in the wine press exactly the same as the grapes do. The juice comes out, goes into the tank, and we add yeast and ferment in the same way.
And again, there is no waste from the process, with the residue from the juice extractor going back into the soil. We return 6 months later to see both the apple and wine juice safely stored away, but much has happened to the juice in that time.
Prior to the storage stage, the wine has been fermenting, and what we mean by that is that the natural sugar in the juice is being eaten by the yeast that we've added. The more the sugar there is in the juice, the higher will be the alcohol content of the wine. The process of fermentation produces two byproducts, alcohol and carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide bubbles out through the top of the tank into the atmosphere, so we can monitor the progress of the fermentation by how quickly the cap on the top of the tank is bubbling. Once we see that the bubbling has stopped, we know that the fermentation is finished, and we can then pump the juice into a storage tank to let it settle over the winter. Reasons for this: once the fermentation is finished, the wine is quite cloudy because there's a fair amount of dead yeast floating around. To get the wine clear, we have to, every couple of months, pump it from one tank to another to leave the debris behind. Also, at the same time, the wine is maturing with age, so that by the time we come to bottle in usually May, the wine will have cleared itself, it will have matured, and then with a final filtration, it goes into the bottle. Today we're bottling our red wine. It's been fermented, it's been stored, it's been filtered. So now comes the final process of putting the wine in the bottle. The first thing we do is to sterilise the bottle, and we have a sterilising solution of sulphite, which you'll always see on wine bottle labels, contains sulphite. So we spray that up into the bottle, which will sterilise it, and then it goes into the machine to fill. The wine is in a tank at the back, it's pumped round into the holding chamber, and then automatically it's filled to the right level, ready for corking, with a corking machine which is run by an air compressor. Once the wine has been bottled, we need to leave it for at least a couple of months for it to recover from the shock of bottling. Then when we wish to sell, it's labelled, and this is the kit that we use. All very simple, really.
With the wine now ready for the market, it is time for the expert's seal of approval. And this year, the judging for the Mercian Vineyards Association is hosted by David in Marston Trussell. We asked the chairman of the judges to explain the process to us.
What we're looking for is purity of fruit, something which expresses the Englishness of the wine. We know that English wine is going to be crispy in balance, lovely acidity, fresh, green sort of fruits. We don't want it to be international style. We want it to be English style, quite different from French and Spanish and Italian. We're looking for a crisp acidity, not too acidic, and above all, a clean, pleasant flavour with no faults, the sort of faults that we used to get some years ago, which have disappeared now because the expertise in making English wine is now so much better. The vines are older, the climate is a little bit warmer, yes, and the wines are now superb, of an international standard, and that is what we are looking for. The actual tasting is really three-part. The first thing is to look at it to see if it's the right sort of colour, and that doesn't give you many marks at all, really. Then the second stage is to get the nose, to swirl the glass and get the aromas and sniff the nose, which should be, in a good English wine, should be fresh and clean and herbaceous. And then on the third part is putting it into the mouth and getting the mouth feel, which should be light, nice and lightweight, not huge body, not high alcohol, very refreshing and clean and quite unique in its Englishness. There is no other wine in the world which tastes like English or Welsh wines.
With results duly recorded, It's time for the annual award ceremony, where David was to receive 2 silver awards and 1 bronze for his wines, and was adjudged Best Grower Winemaker for the year 2016. The full range of wines produced by David and his team are sold in the local farm shops. Farndon Fields, where the red Naseby sits comfortably between wines from France and Australia, and at Ashley with this comprehensive display, red, white and rosé, still and sparkling. Some 9 months from when we started, all that now remains is to sample the end product.